Hey friend, in this video, I am going to be breaking down my entire process for sketching detailed flower petals. So this is actually part one of a 4-part series where we're going to be painting and replicating a very detailed, very fun, loose, detailed style peony, just like the cover art on my second book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers. So I want to highlight a new technique that builds on the previous week every single Saturday of the month to lead us to the final painting, which is going to be this guy. Ooh. Ooh. Very nice. But in order to get there, we have to understand sketching first. Sketching basics of petals to isolate petals, and then next week we'll do the full sketch of the entire peony, and then we'll lead into the watercolor parts in the additional 2 weeks. So in this week, I'm going to share with you my 5 main petal shapes that I use to sketch detailed flowers and how to add contour, more texture to them, and all of that. So if you're ready, then let's dive in. Okay, so in order to paint a semi-realistic peony flower like this, we first need to break down the process of sketching. And I don't always sketch before I paint. It depends on what I'm painting. But if it's something that's more realistic like this, where I have a lot of fluffy petals going on, I will sketch with a very light lead pencil. So something in the H realm, not too soft. If you're using a non-mechanical pencil like this, like the Staedtler Marsley McGrath H pencil is one of my favorites. But I'm gonna use a mechanical pencil, the Sakura 127.7 lead. I really prefer the precision and like fine lines that you get from mechanical pencils, especially if the lead is super thin and small and hard. So this is a really good pencil. You also want to obviously have an eraser on hand. So I'm going to break down my process of sketching more detailed, fluffy like petals. I'm just going to do this on the back of a painting. So just the back of watercolor paper, but if you have printer paper even, or a journal, just where you can just kind of scribble out some of these techniques for petals to practice and develop the muscle memory to then combine it for the future flower. So first things first, what we're going to break down is the overall process of a petal, or the overall shape of a petal. So one of the main shapes is this flat, kind of just open horseshoe shape. And then obviously it'll come to a point down here where the middle of the flower is, or maybe there's another petal covering it up. So one of the overall main shapes that you'll see me sketching is this upside down U shape. And we'll add contour in a bit. It's not just this upside down U shape or this horseshoe shape by itself, because obviously that looks pretty elementary and it has no detail. We're just doing the main shape first. Another kind of more on the side shape is this thin, like it's still a upside down U shape, but this curve on one of the sides is more of an S curve because it goes out and then in. So it's just a slight little S curve. And then from here, you could maybe have a flipped over side or edge to the petal. And you can do that on the other side too. So you have your C curve and then S curve. So it's reflected. And again, you can have the little flip over there. Another really common petal shape is going to be this really squatty, almost like it's flipping up U shape, but it comes in like a vase. So it starts with this little C curve going in this direction, and then it curves back in on both sides. So in and then out for S curves. So you have this maybe has a flipped up part to it. And then we have the detailed petals here, or the veins and details on the petal. You could also do the same thing. So this would be facing you, but you could do the same thing, but maybe curling over like a wave crashing. So we have the same idea, this squatty U shape, but it's upside down U shape. So squatty upside down U shape. And we have the flipped edge is on the top. So those are a couple variations of the overall basic shape that I use for my petals. And sometimes petals are shorter, sometimes petals are taller and longer. And then the main variety that you're gonna get between all these different shapes is the texture that you add to the top of the petal or the top of the petal that's being flipped over. So again, we have our horseshoe shaped petal. We have our little squished, our squished side facing petal with a flip on both sides. So start with just practicing those main petal shapes, the squatty petal and the other squatty petal, like that. Okay, so those are the main 5 shapes for our flower petals. And you can use these for roses, for peonies, for a lot of different types of flowers. The difference will be in how you add your texture and also the width and the length of the petal, because different flowers will have different widths and lengths for their petals. So now that I have those 5 main petal shapes kind of broken down, I'm now going to start adding my detail to my petals to make it really come to life as a more realistic looking petal. So let's take that first upside down U shape or horseshoe shaped petal. Here it is, just the main C curve. And here it is if I were to make it a little bit more realistic. I'm sketching very lightly and I'm making sure to basically do this flicking motion with my fingers where I'm like flicking a light switch on and off. So I'm just gonna, and I'm making these really quick kind of C curve motions. And then I'm going to start adding in my texture. So I'm still following that overall shape of the upside down U shape, but I'm adding in more of that texture on the top. And it's really kind of just like trial and error sometimes, but the more you practice the shapes of these petals and having a reference photo too, if you're not super familiar with sketching flowers, is a good idea. But I like to give these little tears, especially in peony flowers. There's so much texture in their petals. So I like to give these little dips, but they're all smooth curves. All of my lines are either S curves or C curves. So this would be a C curve here to an S curve. You have another C curve there, maybe coming up like so. And then you can add your detail on the petal as well, which I'll get to in a second. So the overall shape is that upside down U shape or horseshoe shape, but adding that contour, that texture to the top of the petal is what really makes it stand out and look more realistic, like a realistic peony petal. So then let's take our other shapes. So we have our C to S shape. It can also be a much steeper arch for your C to S shape, and you can maybe have this cutting off. This is like the back side of the petal coming in like that. So you can really play with this C to S shape and make it feel different each time, but it's really the same thing, C to S. So this curves in right here, which makes it an S curve. And then we're just gonna grab that side and bring it down. C to S, like so. And so to add my detail to this petal, I'm gonna go all the way around my C curve. And then right at that top edge is where I like to start adding my detail. So I'm gonna go maybe in like that. So it's really just for those contour details on the top edge of your petals, parentheses, C curves, it's kind of in the more traditional Japanese style tattoo style of this like really playful C curves and S curves is kind of my sweet spot for those details. So you're really just going between C curves, S curves, maybe even some parenthesis shapes. And then you have your petal shape. Okay, so we have our C to S, adding detail on the top edge of the petal. You can make your petal look wider if you bring this C curve over a little bit more, so the width of the petal is a little bit wider instead of skinny. The skinnier it is, the more it starts to look like a dahlia petal, which is fine, but we're not sketching a dahlia today. So we have those two side petals, and now we have the squatty petal. So the squatty petal, squatty potty petal, starting in on both sides and then curving out really wide. So this is kind of like an oval shape here, and then it comes in. So that oval shape is the bottom side of the petal curling up. So it's like a wave crashing, but it's going the opposite direction. And then we have our C curves. So we could start even with that oval shape and then the two C curves that meet the corners of the oval, even though there's no corners on an oval, but you get what I'm saying. So then I like to go in and do a C curve and another C curve, maybe even flip the C curve out a little bit on the ends like an S curve, and then follow that curve of the top side of the oval with the same traditional Japanese style C curves and S curves. So again, it's like an oval with your C curves, then go around from left to right or right to left and do these big C curves. Try and aim for the middle of that oval for where you put the second C curve. And then you'll come to the edges of those C curves or S curves and give it that puffy cloud, parenthesis, whatever you want to call it, texture on the top. And then you can have your detail lines coming up from bottom to top. To show a little bit more detail, you could also go top to bottom and then leave this kind of as like the highlight in between. We're gonna do more of that shading detail stuff in the next video. So our main shapes, and then for the opposite one, for this one, the same squattiness, you would start with your oval and then same thing, but upside down. So you've got your butt, and then the top of your petal. Details. I'm just doing very quickly, but you get the point. Okay, so practice that over and over and over again, especially this pattern of these random C curves and S curve shapes combined together. So it's really just done really quickly, like I'm writing a check or I'm signing my name. And obviously the more pronounced or curved those C curves and S curves are, the more like playful it'll look. If you want it to be slightly more realistic or organic looking, then slow down your process a little bit and make your shapes a little bit more random and tighter together. But that is really where it's at. When you practice this over and over again and you get that pattern down and those shapes down together, that combination of shapes, it's really just C curves, S curves to make that overall U shape. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was insightful for you. I hope you learned something new. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite little tip or trick was about sketching detailed flower petals. I used to be an illustrator, just mainly sketching and doodling and using ink illustration, and then I've morphed into a watercolor artist. And so sketching is very near and dear to my heart, especially flowers, since I grew up in such a wonderful garden, my mom being a major green thumb. So I hope that was helpful, insightful for you, and make sure you stay tuned for next Saturday's video, next week's video, part 2 of this series, where I'm gonna do the full sketch. I'm dissecting the basic shape of the flower into a sphere and cone shape, and it's gonna be very, very fun. It's a complicated looking flower, but when you break it down in this way, it really does simplify it and make it accessible for anybody. So make sure you get excited for next week's video and the following week's videos, where I'm actually gonna start painting this flower in the next 3 videos. And for those of you who are maybe new to watercolor or need a little bit more of a free resource, I have a 40-page free ebook on the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. We'll drop the link to that below. Make sure you check it out. And I also have a companion course to all of my everyday watercolor books, including my 3rd book, Everyday Watercolor Seashores, which at the time of recording this video comes out in March next month, 2024. So make sure you check out that course. It's under $100, tiny in price, but very, very mighty in value. So make sure you check that out. We'll link to it in the description of this video below, and I will see you in the next video.